and welcome to Season 4, Episode 3 of Pro Wrestling's Top 50. I'm your host, Travis McNeil, and today we continue our countdown of the top 50 matches in Lucha Underground history with match number 48 on our list, which is the death match between Muertes and the Mack from the November 7th, 2018 edition of Lucha Underground, which was Ultima Lucha Cuatro Part 2. Which ultimately, we talked about this the other day, was the final Lucha Underground show. So when I say death match, this might not be, the style of match that you think of when you hear that term. There's no glass or light tubes or barbed wire or thumbtacks or, any of those elements to this match. But the death match was a gimmick match that was used in Lucha Underground for Muertes. The reason being that his character was someone that came back from the dead. Muertes would be one of the biggest, we'll say, original characters in the Lucha Underground universe. His backstory was that he was crushed in an earthquake along with his family as a child. He was resurrected by Katrina, who would be his manager. Katrina, you might remember as Maxine in NXT, if you remember that from way back when. But she resurrected him. He kind of became, her warrior. There was a storyline in season 1 where she turned his back on him, which led to him losing a Grave Consequence matches, which is Lucha Underground's version of a casket match that we will talk at length about in the future on this show. But we later found out that was all done intentionally, because in the Lucha Underground universe, if you lose Grave Consequences, you die, right? We've talked about this already in this series, that in Lucha Underground you can die, and Katrina used that as a vehicle to resurrect him once again, this time stronger than ever, and it would lead to Muertes becoming the Lucha Underground champion at the end of season 1 at Ultima Lucha 1. So throughout, the 4-season run of Lucha Underground, Mil would be a constant, figure for the promotion. He had that main event push with the title. Katrina, was one of the most prominent kind of cinematic sequence characters that there were. And in season 4, we saw Mil get embroiled in a feud with the Mack. So the Mack is Willie Mack, who was a Southern California independent wrestler, that primarily competed in Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. A little bit of strange circumstances there that I don't ever know if we've gotten the full story on it, where Willie Mack got signed by the WWE, departed Pro Wrestling Guerrilla. They did a really nice kind of farewell speech and segment for him on a show that for whatever reason was ultimately cut from the DVD release. Willie Mack would never end up debuting with the WWE. There were some medical issues or things along those lines that I don't quite remember that led to, his signing, being stopped. And from there, Willie Mack kind of never really did much. He never really returned to Pro Wrestling Guerrilla again, a little strange that was the case, because he was one of their bigger, really over performers. But he did get this extended run in Lucha Underground as the Mack. He was brought in as the cousin of Big Rick, who you might remember as Ezekiel Jackson in the WWE. And Big Rick was kind of a very early character. The first few episodes of Lucha Underground, he was kind of like a big, gangster, kind of seedy, underground overlord type character. The Mack was his cousin. He turned out to be, a big-time babyface and someone that the Lucha Underground crowd, who's obviously familiar with him being from the area, that they were really able to get behind. This story started, innocently enough. Lucha Underground has a gimmick title called the Gift of the Gods, which is sort of like their version of the Money in the Bank briefcase, but with a little bit of a different spin on it. We'll talk more about that later, I'm sure, as well. Both of these men were to compete in a match to determine the new Gift of the Gods champion amongst 5 others. Antonio Cueto, who had taken over from Dario Cueto in season 4, as we've discussed, threw a twist on that match, where there would be a battle royal between the 7 competitors, and the winner would be able to choose who they wanted eliminated from the match. So they would no longer get the opportunity to participate in that 7-way, effectively making it a 6-way. The Mack won the battle royal, decided that he didn't want Muertes in the match, so he was choosing to have him eliminated, citing that he scares him. Rightfully so, and that's where this feud picked up. Muertes would ultimately cost the Mack the opportunity to win that title. They would start a feud. They went on to have a house a haunted house match, which was basically the Lucha Underground version of Raven's Clockwork Orange House of Fun from TNA lore. Basically a steel cage match with a bunch of weapons in it. It was pretty good. I find those matches to be a little messy with that many weapons in a confined space, but they did their best with it. That wouldn't put a rest to the issue. We would later find something that was explained, ages ago in Lucha Underground, that Mil Muertes killed Big Rick. Again, Lucha Underground. There was a backstage segment that was so hokey, but it was great, where Katrina and the Mac are trading jabs in the backstage area, and Katrina proceeds to show the Mac in his locker is the skull of Big Rick. So it was just a really terrible looking, plastic skull that you would find at, Halloween Alley or one of those Spirit Halloween type stores. But it had, the eye patch and the big cigar, signature Big Rick trademarks to make it, so that we knew it was Big Rick's skull. It was ridiculous, but it was perfect for Lucha Underground. This match, though, is super good. It's just a basic, really heated brawl with weapons. Mil brings out some caskets at the start that have deathmatch written on them in like red, kind of bloody looking writing. So, it borrows a little bit from the Grave Consequences matches, but they tend not to use the caskets that much, which I appreciated, because it's its own different, type of match that they were having. We get big spots, big dives. The Mac, for being, a bigger, slightly heavier set guy, takes wild bumps. He lands on his head really good, so he gets planted with a DDT on the ring apron, where he just, completely stands on his head off of it. That looked great. We get a big reveal that one of the caskets has a bunch of weapons in it, but they're ridiculous weapons like ice picks and axes and chains and crowbars and things like that. The Mac, all bets are off. He tries to use an axe to basically decapitate, Mil Muertes, take his head like they took the head of Big Rick. But Mil puts a stop to that and uses a railroad spike to carve up the Mac. We get double juice because the Mac ends up fighting back with the chain and ripping at the mask to bust Mil open. We get a great near fall here. Mil Muertes' finisher was a flatliner. Mac takes it perhaps better than anybody else, just spiking himself again on the top of his head for a 2 count, which was a really great near fall and a callback to their haunted house match, where it was a flatliner from the top through a table that ended it there. Our finishing run here is really great. It made the Mac look great. It made Mil Muertes look great in defeat as well. So Mil goes for a chokeslam. It's countered into the Stone Cold Stunner, which they built up, from Mac's debut as his finisher. He hits the stunner out of the chokeslam. Mil doesn't go down. Hits another stunner. Mil doesn't go down. He grabs a brick and hits Mil in the head with the brick. Still no sells it, and then it's finally, the double bird, Steve Austin style, and one more Stone Cold Stunner to put him away. Mac would then proceed to roll Mil Muertes into the casket and have, a very Stone Cold Steve Austin-esque, beer bash and dump the beer on Mil Muertes before closing the lid. And ultimately, this would be the last we would see of Mil Muertes, given that it was the last episode of Lucha Underground before he turned back up in MLW's Azteca Underground, seemingly working for, Cesar Duran, the repackaged Dario Cueto. So we'll see where that ends up leading off as MLW starts to expand that universe. This is a super fun match, though. It is maybe my favorite performance that the Mac had overall in Lucha Underground. I was a big fan of him on the indies, so again, happy that he had his success here. Mil Muertes is a real journeyman. Ricky Banderas is who plays the character. He was a big name, late 90s, early 2000s in Puerto Rico for IWA Puerto Rico and later the WWC. He had, a brief TNA run as Judas Macias. He was brought in as Abyss's brother, when they basically tried to do an Undertaker-Kane storyline and had a no-rope barbed wire match with Abyss there. He turned up in Wrestling Society X. He was their champion and feuded with Vampiro. He had a main event run in AAA, so he was always this guy that was kind of around, for the better part of 20 plus years, but he never really found much, we'll say US prominence until this role in Lucha Underground. He was great, absolutely one of the Lucha Underground MVPs, and someone that I'm really happy as MLW tries to use this concept that he's been brought over with it as well. And I wish somehow they resurrect Katrina from the dead. That's something that we didn't mention, but ultimately Mil ended up killing Katrina in season 4. So I would love to see Carly Perez, you know, redo that character and show up with Mil and Aztec Underground, but we'll see what happens. You know, I've mentioned it already, Lucha Underground. Google it, find out where you can watch it. It's a hell of a ride. You can subscribe to my channel here on YouTube, though, so that you never miss a video, especially as we talk, you know, through this season 4 of our program. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Wrestling50, and please join me again tomorrow, as always, as we continue to count down Pro Wrestling's Top 50. Top 50.